Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. We're going to be diving into something pretty important, I think, the ethical side of engineering and how we adopt new technology. It's not just about building the future, right?
Right.
It's about building it responsibly.
Yeah, it's like, we've mastered how to make the clock tick, but have you ever stopped to think, like, what time should we even set it to?
Exactly.
We're really going beyond just the how and more into, like, the who, what, where, and when of it all.
Yeah, and thankfully we have some really interesting research to help guide this deep dive today. It's from the 2024 AE Southeastern Section Conference, a paper called Engineers as Agents of Technological Change.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one. A lot of different experts weighing in on how, all engineers, no matter what your specific discipline is, you really do play a huge role in shaping the future.
Huge role, and I love how the paper jumps right in with this idea, this statement. It's not just about how, and I think as engineers, we love the how, right?
Oh,
We love the nuts and bolts of making technology work, but sometimes we can get maybe not oblivious, but a little less mindful of all the other questions, the other really important
well,
questions.
yeah, it's like having, a powerful toolbox.
Mm,
Knowing how to use all the tools, that's important.
yeah.
But also understanding what you're building, who it's for, thinking about like the consequences, intended or unintended. I mean, that's where it gets really interesting.
It's the bigger picture. And they use a great example in the paper. They talk about blitz scaling,
Oh, yeah.
which everyone's familiar with that whole move fast and break things mentality. Rapid tech adoption, often for the sake of, just dominating the market. And we've seen how many companies have just exploded in size using that very principle.
It's fascinating, right? Because on the one hand, it can be very, very effective.
Oh, yeah.
But I think what the paper argues is that that singular focus on speed can sometimes, come at a cost. Right. Like other considerations, ethical considerations, might fall by the wayside in that race to be the first, to be the best.
To be the biggest.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that can lead to a lot of unintended consequences.
It can. It almost reminds me of, building a bridge as fast as you can to get ahead of the competition, but forgetting to maybe check if the materials are actually,
Yeah.
sound,
Exactly.
which kind of leads us perfectly into the next major point the paper makes, which is the illusion of better. We always just assume that newer technology equals better technology.
100%.
But is that always the case?
That's such a slippery slope to go down, isn't it?
It is.
Because you just assume, oh, this is newer, therefore it must be better.
Mm.
And the paper really emphasizes that, progress isn't always this straight line.
It's true.
And sometimes a slower, maybe even a more deliberate approach is actually the better way.
Mm.
And they quote a philosopher, Mark Steen, and he argues that this slower pace, it gives us time to reflect, like on the uneasy questions or vulnerable experiences and uncertainty. These are all things that we don't really have the luxury of necessarily pondering in our fast-paced world.
I think that's a really refreshing way to look at it.
Yeah.
That slowing down is sometimes maybe the faster path in the long run. But how do you balance that, right?
Yeah.
That need for reflection with this world that's obsessed with what's next.
Exactly. Always moving on to the next big thing.
And that's where I think the paper really digs into what they call the agency dilemma.
Okay.
And it gets into this idea that every choice, every single choice you make as an engineer about, what technology to adopt or how to use it, some of them might feel small, they might feel insignificant,
Sure.
but others, those choices could have a much, much wider impact.
Yeah,
Right?
butterfly effect, right.
It's like the butterfly effect, exactly. But in the tech world, like you could have, a software engineer in Silicon Valley writes a piece of code, seems small at the time, but it snowballs into something that affects millions of people's lives
Exactly.
in ways that maybe they couldn't even really imagine when they were first writing that code.
Yeah, and it all comes back to this idea of responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And the paper draws a really important distinction between what they call passive responsibility, you know, being held accountable after something bad has already happened.
Okay, now you've got me interested. Tell me more about this difference.
So passive responsibility is like, realizing you left a window open during a rainstorm, but only after your carpet's totally soaked.
Oh, no.
Right. But then there's active responsibility, and that's about, checking the forecast, being proactive, closing the window before the storm hits. It's about foreseeing those potential issues and actually taking steps to prevent them before they happen.
So thinking ahead, those what-if scenarios, I can see why that's so important. But it also feels like a lot of pressure,
It's actually a balancing act.
to constantly be considering the potential downsides of everything that you're working on.
For sure. And the research does acknowledge that complexity. But before we even go there, I think there's an even more fundamental point that this research raises, and it's that tech doesn't have ethics, people do.
Yes, because it's very easy, especially now with AI, to start to think of technology as this almost sentient being, like it's making its own calls.
Right.
But ultimately, it's just lines of code
Lines of code written by humans,
written by humans.
influenced by their experiences, their biases,
Mhm.
and, yeah, their sense of ethics.
Their sense of ethics.
And we can't forget that.
We can't.
The research uses the example of, what are those smart speakers?
Smart speakers, yeah.
They're designed to sound like this helpful friend, but, in the end, it's the engineers, the companies behind them, that are ultimately setting the ethical boundaries for how that technology is used.
It really makes you think. Like, how often do we stop and think, okay, who's actually making the decisions here? It's easy to get caught up in the technology itself.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, smart speakers. It's really across the board. And when you think about all the ethical challenges that come up in this digital age, I mean, wow,
Yeah, there's no shortage.
there's a lot to unpack there.
There is, and this paper really encourages us to think critically about things like privacy, social equity, job displacement, even the right to repair, things that we've talked about a little bit on this show in the past, but
Right.
this paper brings them all together in a really interesting way.
It does.
So let's dig in a little bit, and maybe we can start with privacy, because I feel like that's the one that's always.
Top of mind for a lot of people.
It's like it's in the headlines every day. It's like with all the sensors and facial recognition and data-hungry algorithms, it seems like almost every move we make is being tracked and analyzed in some way.
Yeah, like you're leaving this digital footprint everywhere you go.
Everywhere, and even if you're not online, right? I mean, it's offline too.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the research really highlights how crucial it is for engineers to be asking themselves, what are the implications of this data collection?
Yeah.
How can we design these systems where user privacy is like baked in from the very beginning?
Designing with intention, I like that, because it's not just about protecting ourselves from some like Orwellian surveillance state, which sometimes it feels like that.
Yeah.
But it's also about just our own autonomy,
Right.
our right to self-determination in a world that is so driven by data.
Yeah, and that actually ties really well into the next ethical challenge, which is social equity.
Okay.
How do we make sure that all these advancements, all these technological advancements, benefit everybody?
Not just the select few.
Not just a select few.
Like, we're building a bridge to the future, but we want to make sure everyone can cross it. Not just the people who have the resources, the knowledge to do so.
Exactly. And that means we need to consciously consider the needs of diverse communities. I'm talking about things like access to education, healthcare, even just basic infrastructure in some places.
The digital divide is a real thing, and if we're not careful,
Huge.
it's only going to get wider.
And we have a responsibility to make sure that the technology we're creating isn't contributing to that.
Absolutely, yeah. Technology should be a tool for empowerment, not for division. But there's this other side of it too, and it's something that comes up a lot in these discussions about ethics and technology, and that's job displacement.
Sure.
Because on one hand, automation, it can improve efficiency, it can
Streamline things.
it can make things better, right?
Yeah.
Streamline things, exactly. But it can also lead to job losses, and that's something that understandably people are concerned about.
Of course, it's a very valid concern. And I think what the paper really pushes us to do is to not shy away from those conversations, even though they might be difficult, but actually engage with them head on.
Yeah.
How can we design technologies that, instead of just replacing human capabilities, actually complement them?
Yeah.
Can we leverage these advancements for things like retraining, upskilling the workforce? I mean, these are questions that we can't ignore.
We can't. It's about finding that balance between this drive for progress, but also making sure that we're not leaving people behind.
Right.
And speaking of potential unintended consequences, I thought it was really fascinating how the paper also kind of dug into the right to repair, which is something that we've talked about on this show before.
It's an interesting one.
It is. And it gets into this whole question of ownership and control. Because.
Right. Like who gets to decide how long your devices last?
Yeah, and who gets to fix them? And because a lot of times design choices are being made that make it much harder for people to actually repair their own stuff.
Yeah,
And then they're forced to go through these, expensive manufacturer-controlled channels.
which is great for the companies.
Great for the companies, maybe not so great for the consumer or the environment, let's be honest.
Not really.
Because it really feels like we're being pushed towards this constant cycle of consumption.
Right. Constantly upgrading.
Which, again, good for the bottom line, but is it good for the planet?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, no. So the research, I thought it was great how it challenged us to really think about, okay, how are our design choices impacting these bigger issues of ownership and control and, sustainability? It's not just about the technology itself. It's about, what happens after it leaves our hands.
Absolutely. It's about empowering users, not, locking them into some kind of system where they're dependent on us.
Right. Makes you wonder, like, what would happen if we designed things to be repairable from the start? Or if we actually designed for longevity? But I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about probably, I don't know, maybe the most talked about and probably one of the most ethically complex technologies that's out there right now, and that is artificial intelligence, or AI.
Oh, yeah. Where do we even begin?
I know. It's like everyone's talking about it. It's everywhere you turn.
It's fascinating, right? Because it has the potential to, really revolutionize so many different fields. Everything from healthcare to transportation, like you name it.
It's already happening.
It is, but like you said, there's this immense potential,
Hmm.
but it doesn't come without some serious ethical baggage.
Right. And it seems like every other day there's some new headline about, AI can do this, AI can do that. But also, wait a minute, what about this potential pitfall or that unintended consequence?
Yeah, for every step forward, it
Mm.
feels like there's also this, what could go wrong. And the paper does acknowledge that while there are some general principles for ethical AI usage, they kind of like emerging, they even say that that's not enough.
It's not enough.
No.
So what do we do?
It really comes down to each engineer, each individual engineer, putting those principles into practice,
Okay.
making sure that the AI tools they're using, the systems they're building, are being used responsibly.
So it's less about like waiting for some grand set of rules to be handed down and more about individual accountability, individual action.
100%. And being willing to ask those tough questions, like what biases might be
Yeah.
built into this AI system?
How can I mitigate those biases?
How can I mitigate those biases? Exactly.
Yeah.
What are the potential unintended consequences? Like, these are questions we have to be asking ourselves.
It's about going beyond just the capabilities of AI and really thinking deeply about like the potential impact on individuals, on society as a whole.
Hmm.
So how do we prepare engineers for that? I mean, it feels like education has to play a big role.
Huge role.
Right.
And that's actually something that the paper delves into as well, the importance of ethical education for engineers. And it's not just about, checking the ethics course off your syllabus.
Right.
It's about really cultivating this culture of like ethical reflection, ethical action
Yeah.
throughout the field.
Yeah, so it's not just about knowing the rules, it's about really instilling that sense of responsibility in future engineers.
Exactly.
But I mean, and maybe this is just me being a little bit too, I don't know, cynical,
Go for it.
but does simply having that knowledge actually translate into ethical behavior in the real world?
That's a great question.
Because it's one thing to like ace your ethics exam,
Right.
but it's another thing entirely to actually apply what you've learned when you're faced with like real world pressures, deadlines, maybe even conflicting priorities.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where it becomes less about, simply teaching the knowledge and more about nurturing this genuine culture of, like you said, awareness and action within the field itself.
So how do you bridge that gap, right, between the theory and the practice?
That is the million-dollar question.
It's like they say, right,
Yeah.
actions speak louder than words.
100%. Yeah, seeing ethical conduct modeled in real life, it
Yeah.
makes a huge difference. It makes those principles feel a lot more attainable. It's not just some abstract idea in a textbook.
Right, exactly. And the paper, they talk about how mentorship, both formal and informal, can be so influential in those early stages of an engineer's career. But they also argue that it has to go beyond just the individual level, right?
Yeah, individual influence is huge, don't get me
Right.
wrong.
Yeah.
But we need a systemic shift where organizations are actively creating environments, cultures that actually value these ethical considerations, not just,
Lip service.
yeah, not just lip service.
Can't just be like, oh, ethics are important, and then everyone goes back to, business as usual.
Exactly. Got to walk the walk.
So how do we actually do that? How do we move from just like talking about ethics to actually embedding them in the very fabric of, of how an organization operates?
That's the million-dollar question. And I
Yeah.
think that's where this deep dive really leaves you with some things to mull over, to think about, right?
Yeah.
The paper focuses mostly on, individual responsibility, which of course is critical, but they also kind of hint at this idea of collective action
Okay.
and this idea that engineers need to work together to actually address these bigger systemic ethical issues.
So what does that look like, though? Like when you say collective action in the engineering world, what are we talking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. And to be honest, the paper doesn't necessarily get into specific strategies.
Right.
But I think the question they pose is a really important one, and it's how can engineers use their voice, their influence, collectively to really advocate for these ethical practices?
It's almost like I'm imagining like, engineers banding together to create these ethical standards or to like call out practices that maybe aren't,
Right.
up to par.
Yeah, hold each other accountable.
Hold each other accountable, exactly.
I think there's a lot of power in that.
There is power in numbers,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. And it's that recognition that we're all in this together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Navigating these challenges, shaping the future of technology. I think if we can approach it from that perspective, that, we can achieve some really great things.
Yeah, and hopefully build a future where technology actually does serve humanity in a way that's both innovative and, ethical.
Absolutely. It's possible.
It is possible. We gotta get there. Well, this has been, really a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, this was great.
We've covered a lot of ground today, everything from, that illusion of better to the responsibility that comes with individual agency, and of course, the importance of building an ethical culture within engineering as a whole. But I think as we wrap up here, if there's one big takeaway for you listening out there, maybe you're struggling with some of these very same issues in your own work. What would you say, like what's the one thing to keep in mind as you're moving forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if I had to boil it down to one thing, it would be that approaching technology ethically, it's not about like checking boxes or, passing some test.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
It's a journey.
It is. It's a journey. It's about cultivating this constant awareness, constantly questioning, constantly being willing to, learn and adapt, and just being committed to using your skills, your knowledge in a responsible way. And, don't be afraid to speak up, voice your concerns, think about the impact of your work. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are people out there who want to see the same things that you do.
Absolutely. Connect with those people, keep these conversations going, challenge the status quo if you have to. And as we sign off today, I want to leave you with this one last thought-provoking question from the paper, and it's this. Think about how you can be more than just an agent of technological change, be an agent of ethical technological change, because you have the power to make that happen. And until next time, keep asking those tough questions and keep striving to build that better, more ethical future that we all want to see.